Welcome to the Fearless Females Voice podcast, where women's stories and experiences are shared in order to empower and inspire others. Before we begin this podcast, I wanted to share that the Becoming Fearless program is now launched and enrollment is open until Friday, 18th of June. This is a 12-week transformation program which will help build your confidence and overcome your fears to live your best life. I cannot wait to start it. You can check out more details about my program on www.fearlessfemales.me. I am so excited to release this episode where I am joined by Jana Alonso, who runs her own successful business in healing processes. Jana had some difficult experiences growing up, which led her to becoming diagnosed with depression and an eating disorder. She had an awakening moment where she knew she had to make a change to make things better. She started working on herself and understanding more about what her past traumas meant, and then her mindset evolved. Jana is now an integrative healing expert and has a mission to pass on this message and help other women. On this podcast, she talks to us about her past traumas and experiences which has led her to where she is now, some concepts of healing, shadow work, how to handle our emotions and the consequences of bottling them up, and more about her 3-day immersion workshop, which you can now check out in the show notes. I loved speaking to Jana and loved her story and everything that she is now doing. So without further ado, let's get stuck in. Jana, tell me, what does being a fearless female mean to you?
I've been thinking about this question ever since I kind of looked on your social media, and I think it's a woman that's not afraid to be fully herself in a society that actually does not always make it easy. So I think actually it's twofold. It's a woman that's not afraid to be fully herself and whatever that looks like, but it's also a woman who's willing to sit with adversity, build resilience, and actually use that to transform her life, right? Because when we have a very difficult situation, and we all get these situations that manifest in our life one way or another, whether it's a passing or a very difficult breakup or an illness, we have two choices there. And you have a choice to fall into victim, or you have a choice to take full responsibility. And the person that takes full responsibility, for me, is the fearless female. And it's also the person who ends up being able to live a life full of potential, because there is so much potential available for us if we're willing to really take full responsibility for our lives and all that entails, really. So it's a great question, because there's so many ways you can go with it. But I think those are the two main things that really speak to me when I hear it.
Oh, I love that. That's so powerful. And you touched a bit on the victim mentality. So when something happens or a big change happens, and we tend to go into kind of victim mode. Have you experienced this yourself?
Of course, and I still do. It happens. And so, you know, when you kind of get into this work, you can't take yourself so seriously, because we all do. And if we feel such shame and guilt for all of our experiences, it's that you never actually grow, because you're too busy trapped in kind of that shame and blame. We all go into victim, and we all have, and we all will. And it's less about do you, and it's more about awareness and catching it, right? So it becomes...
Agree.
Yeah. So it becomes a short segment in your story, not your whole story. Yeah. Right. And so, I mean, I can tell you a few specific times that kind of come to mind. I think it's our first response, usually, before we realize that there's another story, and before it's a lot to do as well as who's around you and what stories they're telling and what their narrative is and what you're living. But I remember when my mum got ill, and I became a full-time carer at the age of 23, so I gave up everything. I moved home from New Zealand, and my life became my mum's cancer. And I remember feeling a lot of resentment and a lot of frustration, because everyone else was having fun, and I was just in and out of hospitals for about 3 years. And the initial feeling was jealousy and poor me, and everyone else has got their mum. And when I managed to get through this, and I was like, actually, you know, this is happening for me, right? There is a divine intelligence guiding me. So who is this going to make me be? And so the end result of that is, many years later, very, very grateful for the experiences I lived, because I wouldn't have the business, or I wouldn't be able to guide women through such deep processes if I hadn't kind of dived straight into the underworld myself. So the victim mentality is very often the initial reflex, but still within that, we've got the choice to still use it to our advantage, to still shift and start taking responsibility and actually fully believing whatever is happening for us, and then seeing where that journey takes us, right? And that's usually a lot better than where we started.
Yes. But that shift in mindset, I find, is can be quite challenging, or some people find it very difficult to come out of that victim mentality. That's what they know. And it's almost like, you mentioned the external influences. So other people, or something on the news, something on TV, whatever it is that's keeping them there, as well as their own personal mindset. And I feel that's the difficult bit, like to overcome that. So as you said, you did overcome it, and you realized with your mindset that actually there's bigger and better things, and I need to change. I need to make that shift.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you're so right. And I think our environment does play a big role. Kind of what we're watching, what we're listening to, everything around us is kind of seeping into our unconscious. But even within that, there is an element of a choice. Right. So if you've somehow managed to happen upon this podcast and you're listening to it, maybe it's to bring your awareness to you have a choice, right? Because that's how life works. That's how the universe works. Okay. And initially that might be really frightening. And you're like, how do I take that leap? But choosing it is the first step. And once you do, the other steps present themselves. And life kind of organizes itself in this fashion for circumstances, relationships, situations to arise to help you on that journey. You don't have to know the end.
This is it. And I always feel that, I found in my experiences, when I am afraid, I just have to take that first little step, which is the most difficult step to take. And then as soon as that first step is taken, the whole path just unravels. And although I'm thinking of the end game, it's almost like, right, you need to stop thinking of that and just go with it. Go with the flow, and it will take you to a beautiful place. So that's what I found from my experiences. So you've touched a bit on your experiences and your mum's illness. So can you tell us more about what you do now and how you got there?
Such a long story. I'm going to give you like the condensed version.
We have time.
Because I feel like it's literally my life's work. I've always been on this path, but I suppose let's start, and I always tell around from when I was about 18 or 19, and I was diagnosed with serious mental health. So anxiety, depression, and eating disorder. I had social anxiety, so I really struggled to leave my home. And I really found out in that moment that was actually a continuation of kind of my mum's pain. And I talk about my story really properly, really thoroughly, in the chapter I've written in Legacy Speaks, a book. But in essence, I realized at that age, when it was a few years later, that I'd really taken on a lot of my mum's trauma. And so I was going through something which is called generational wounding and trauma. And my mum had struggled her whole life with depression and many more other things. And so it all kind of came to a head when my mum was diagnosed with, actually she got diagnosed with cancer the same month I got all my mental health diagnoses. So that was just fantastic. And I felt like my whole world collapsed. But our world collapsed so we can build a new, stronger one, okay? And that's a really big understanding that came to me years later. And I suppose there was this moment, and it started with this one moment, which is kind of that one moment of empowerment, like we just spoke about, where I met a personal trainer. I told him about all of my mental health problems, and I told him about how I felt about myself, and I felt very trapped. I'd gone to university, I was a good girl, I was doing what we meant to do, I had incredible results, and I was absolutely miserable, which happens, doesn't it, when you're on a path that's not yours. Anyway, he said to me for the very first time in my life, Hannah, it doesn't have to be this way. And a little light bulb switched on in my head, and it was an element of, if it doesn't have to be this way, what way do I want it to be? And no one had really asked me that before. No one really asked me what I desired from my life. And so ever since then to now, it's been nearly 10 years, a little bit less. So it's been a long path, and it's kind of led to working with women all over the world. I work majoritively with trauma, relationships, emotions, reprogramming the unconscious mind. I always say that I empower women and I educate women to become self-healers and the alchemists of their life, So by that, I mean being able to alchemize or transform or transmute, whatever words you want to use, their painful situations or what's caging them, what's not working in their life, to a beautiful, beautiful gift in their medicine. And we all have that potential. And so the end result, actually very often from trauma or pain or upset or breakups, is living this really incredible, rich life, right? The true embodiment of wealth, not just money, time, pleasure, the relationship that you desire, because that's all possible if we're willing to sit with the uncomfortable, right? So I'm the founder of a school called the School of Integrative Healing, where we use multiple modalities. We have multiple teachers, and we're training and educating and empowering women all over the world. And it's such a beautiful, beautiful community that I absolutely adore. And there's so much more to my story, but that's kind of really it in an essence. So I truly feel that, and there's a lot more experiences that I've had along the way that have been very painful, but I truly believe that I had to go through all those experiences to be able to hold women in all the experiences that they entail, right? And that was always my initiation into my work.
I love the way you just told your story, and also your thinking behind it all. And I think that's so difficult, to actually turn such a difficult situation into a positive, into knowing that there's more to life, there's more out there. And as he asked the question, what was it that he asked you, and you had to think differently, is what else do you want, or how do you want it to be?
He just said it doesn't have to be this way. And my head just went, no one's ever said that to me before. Because I'd just gone to the doctors and they're like, just take your pills. My mom said, yeah, just do what I'm doing. I've been taking my pills. She had her first breakdown at 19, same time I did. And that was the only option I'd been given. So when someone said to you, it doesn't have to be this way, I'm like, my head exploded, like, oh, I can choose? Because I hadn't realized that till that point. Because you're at school, right, jumping through hoops, and then you're at university, jumping through more hoops. And until you leave university, it's almost like you don't properly think about what you desire. So I hadn't really experienced who I was until I left uni.
Yeah, because society and life and people tell you the route that you want to take. And this is kind of something similar that happened to me as well. So I went to school, I went to university, I started a job. However, that's all I really knew. I didn't know that there were other things that I could do until recently. So it's very good that you found that at a younger age. So I'm now in my 30s and I'm like, oh, wow, there's more to it than what I was doing. I didn't actually enjoy what I was doing. And it was a wake-up call for me. So I completely understand where you're coming from. And when you talk about the diagnosis that you had, that must have been during your university time, right? When you were 19 in university?
Yeah, so yeah, I had just finished my first year of university. I think I hadn't started second year. I think it was towards the end of second year. Can't really remember. End of first year or end of second year, but I was definitely at university. And so I think university can also be a challenge for us, because you've been kind of in this very safe family environment, and then you're just thrown into this place where, I mean, like a lot of people, I did a lot of drugs, I drank a lot of alcohol, I had very unhealthy sexual relationships, I no longer had anyone watching what I was eating, and I'd struggled with food since I was about 7, so this wasn't new. But this kind of all just fed into lack of self-esteem, and then these very high standards I put on myself, because I was a high achiever. I've always been a high achiever. And so that really was a cocktail for just really, really falling apart. But we really fall apart because our life is trying to teach us that's not the way, right? And so I feel that that's what I feel no shame over this. I feel my life was teaching me that this is not the way to look after my body. This is not the way to live. This is not the way to have relationships. This is not the way to live out your sexuality, right? Because you don't feel good. And it took me a long time to really understand that. But now, again, I'm really grateful. So if you are listening to this and you're in a situation where things don't feel good, know that that's the sign, because they're not for you. I know that's simply the sign that there's another way. And sometimes we overcomplicate it, but it is really that simple.
Yeah, overcomplicating, but also don't see the other way. That's it, right? You're almost blind into it because you don't actually know. And also you're afraid to take that leap because you're in your comfort zone of this is what I'm doing, this is what works or I think works. However, everything out there, everything else, which is far and out of reach, I don't really want to go there because I'm scared. I don't actually know. I don't know what to expect. I'm just in my comfort zone doing my things. I don't really know. So that's another element of it as well. I think that, or from my experiences anyway, is what I felt. But as we said, when you take that first step, that's it. It all unravels.
Completely. I could not agree more, because why should you know? You've never been exposed to it. You've never been taught it. And so that's what we say in integrative healing. We say it's like, this is the school, and I don't like the word should, but this is the school that would have probably been better to have had in our youth, actual skills. And that's why we educate women, because it's actually an education problem, because we don't realize the potentials we have, and we don't actually understand the self. So when we say an authentic life or connection to self, for a lot of people, that's like, what does that mean? How do I do that? How do I get there?
Well, right? What does that mean? What does that mean for you?
It's a good question. So I think beneath all our conditioning, okay, so since we're little, how can I put this in a simple way? Since we're little, we are constantly being conditioned by our surroundings, by our parents, by our cultural norms, by our education system. And all those conditionings start molding who we are. And so we start living out in shoulds. I should be this way. We start acting in different ways. So we receive love, right? And we're not rejected. And every time we go on this path, we become slightly less of ourselves. So the authentic self is the self before the conditioning, right? Before the shoulds, before the rules, before the beliefs about how we have to receive love. And so I feel like to find the authentic self, all of us have to go through the path of losing it, right? To re-find it. And so for me, that's taking off the layers of conditioning. That's doing the childhood trauma work. That's doing the belief work. That's becoming aware of the narrative that you've got going on in your head, right? And questioning your beliefs. And it's actually, for me, a feeling beyond that. And so the authentic self is actually to be in alignment with your truth, right? Which again sounds really big and maybe confusing, but the essence of that is, again, getting beyond the conditioning to see what you desire, what you want, what makes you feel good, right? Yeah. And that's not just, oh, I found my authentic self. That's a path that we take until we leave this world, right? Because we've kind of got a fast food culture, and that sometimes seeps into personal development. And personal development isn't about achieving anything, right? It's just about taking layers off slowly as life presents to us, and it's kind of taking away that achieving focus away from this as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's so well said. I'm literally just like, wow, yes, everything you're saying I can resonate with. So yeah, I completely agree with that. It's really interesting the way you put that as well. It's almost like shedding the layers, and then it's an ongoing process as well. Because people always say, what's the end game, or what is the authentic self? But it's personal development, I see, is just continuous improvement, continuous growth. There's always new things that will come your way, or you develop in a new way. Your mind will think differently, and that's okay. It's fine to do that. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. When you were when you were 19 and you were diagnosed, you mentioned that it took you a few years to understand that there is actually more, or you can live differently. How were those few years in between when you were actually diagnosed and still kind of understanding what you wanted, what is life, that there's more to life? What was that like?
Oh, wow, that is a very good question. I actually never been asked that. Difficult, I think, is the honest answer. Of course it's difficult. So I was on antidepressants and I have nothing against medication. I want to make that really clear, because sometimes it saves lives, and I know you tend to get polarizing opinions of extremes, and I'm not about that. I'm about what works for each person. But anyway, it wasn't what I wanted long term in my life. So I was on medication for nearly 4 years before coming off them. And I think in those 4 years, I improved enough to want to stay alive. But I really got to the point of, it was probably around 22, where I really questioned, is this it? Is this life? And I'd see people on social media being like, I love life, this is great, and I used to honestly sit there and I'd ponder, and I'd be like, is that real? Are they happy? What does that feel like? Because my depression started so young. Okay, so this is a trigger warning here. My kind of issues started in the womb. So just if anyone does struggle with suicidality, just a trigger warning before I say this, but my mum tried to commit suicide when she was pregnant with me. And so then she had been taken obviously to a centre, so she didn't, and then she was medicated for the final months of pregnancy, and that's when I was born. So I had the effects of the antidepressants within the womb. I had also had the emotional effects of my mother being in such a bad position during pregnancy. And so I really, in my childhood, even though there was happiness, experienced a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear from a very, very, very young age. So I've done a lot of work around the womb environment. Anyway, my point for saying this was by the time I got to my early 20s, I was like, is this life? If this is life, I'm not sure I'm down for it because it's really painful. And I experienced a lot of internal pain. And actually, I think it got to the point of I just lie in bed and I wasn't able to do anything because I experienced so much pain within me that I thought, either I change this or I don't do this anymore. I really don't tell this part of the story very often, and I forget that it happened because it's so different to what I'm living now. And then there was the incident with the personal trainer, right? Because when you're ready, the teacher, kind of lands. And then there was the slow getting better, but it was probably a process of another 4 years until I really started experiencing big, big changes. And this is why I educate people on it. And so it started with changing my diet when I got off my antidepressants. And I remember calling my mum and being like, oh, Mum, today I woke up and I wanted to be alive. And that really sounds wild for someone that's not experienced depression, but that was my experience of life, right? And then after the nutrition started, I suppose I got overly, and I see this a lot as well, I got overly obsessive about health, right? And that actually was detrimental, and that was another form of my eating disorder, but another face of it. Right?
Detrimental in which way? So you were just trying to look after your physical appearance, your body? So it was overdoing it?
Just over-obsession, over-obsessing about what I was eating, over-exercising. I think there was a trend, wasn't there, a few years ago, which was the gym trend, and it was not healthy, particularly. Yeah. So yeah, I went into an extreme there, and also I'm someone that goes into extremes. But this was part of my process, and so if you're hearing this and this is part of your process, that's okay as well, as long as you bring awareness to it and you don't get stuck in it, right? And so there was the nutrition kind of phase, but that did help. And then after going into nutrition, I started exploring yoga, meditation. I moved to India, and at this sort of time, my mum was diagnosed as well, right? And so mum's kind of terminal diagnosis made me realize that nutrition, diet, and yoga, meditation isn't enough. It isn't enough because it doesn't do the really deep work. And so that really pushed me into doing the trauma work, the unconscious work, the emotional healing, and all of this stuff. So it wasn't just, after these 4 years, which are very, very difficult, I clicked my fingers, I'm going to change. Ta-da! It was this slow becoming. And that's actually why I created Integrative Healing, because it's 10 years worth of exploring and putting it together, because I see very often out there still what's given us superficial solutions that aren't going to take us to that deep, deep healing that we need. And that's really honestly the trauma work. From what I've seen, the trauma, the emotional, the energetic work, that's when we go there, you experience actual change. And I haven't had a depressive episode in a long, long time. And it's not just that, I experienced a joy that I didn't think was possible. I have healthy relationships. I have a very abundant business and life, and experience wealth in many, many, many areas. So not only did I kind of complete my initial goal, which was want to live, it went far, far further than I could have ever imagined. And that's thanks to that depression.
Wow, that's amazing. You've really taken it to the next level. You were talking about having control, and we were talking about luck and actually being in control and formulating your own luck or your life, right? You've pretty much done that using your experiences. It's got you where you are. That's incredible.
But we all have that potential, and people say this to me, like, oh, I'm so jealous of where you live, or I'm so jealous. And I'm like, you can do it too. And so the key to getting there is to taking responsibility for when it's really painful. Everything that I've got now, and I'm still learning, right? When it's very clear, I'm still learning, I'm still human. I've not attained any form of perfection. I'm not even close to it. But anything that I've got now that's considered desirable or something that I desired, I've actually walked a very difficult path, right?
Yeah.
And it's been that, and so you talk about fearless female, but it's showing up when it hurts. And the fearless female is usually shit scared, but she does it anyway, right? Because I've always been scared.
I'm scared as well. This is it. Like, people are always like, oh, you must be fearless. I'm like, no, I'm scared. Even today, like tomorrow, I'm launching a website and a product. I'm really nervous and scared about it, but I'm still doing it. Like, I know it's got to be done. Press the button, get it done. And I think that's the whole point. You feel afraid, but it's what action you take with that fear or you don't take with that fear. And that's what will help you get closer to this desirable end state, the one that you just mentioned about people saying, oh, I'm jealous of where you're living, the sun and all that. But you're right. We can all do it if we actually want to, or just overcome our fears to get there. So, yeah. And you talked about the trauma. Is it trauma therapy and looking at the emotional side of things? Can you talk to us more about the trauma work? I think you called it. Yep, trauma work.
Yeah, it's sometimes unclear, and I feel like trauma is mentioned a lot. We don't really know what it means. Trauma is purely a situation in our life that occurs where we don't have the developed emotional processing skills to be able to process it fully. So the emotion gets trapped in our body, and we also develop mental patterns that don't benefit us. That's quite a complicated way to explain it for you, but that's the technical. Do you want a different explanation that's softer?
No. I think that makes sense. I was just going to say, but that could be any experience, and the reason why we have that is because we haven't experienced it before, right? It's kind of a shock experience. Is that what will be classed as the trauma?
So trauma isn't a big thing. I don't know how to put this in a way. Yeah, I do. So everyone thinks trauma is like war or sexual abuse, and it's not. It could be asking your dad for a hug when you're 4 and he says, I'm busy, right? And when you're 4, yes, you don't have an emotionally developed body or system. So most of our trauma, most of our imprinting happens before the age of 6. Before the age of 6, we're super plastic. And basically everything that we experience is programmed within us, and it kind of sets a lot of our behavior patterns and basically our unconscious mind for our adulthood until we look at it again, if we look at it again. So let me give you an example of traumas. I do a lot of trauma processing with people. I'll give you an example of one of mine, actually. So, and trauma impacts us in many ways. And so I was doing a process because I was finding a while ago that I was really struggling to have a successful business and also have a romantic relationship, right? And it kept coming up in my life, and it was really painful because I was like, got this great business, but I find love very hard, which happens to a lot of successful women. And I realized, okay, so if I'm fully responsible for my life, that means I'm going to do the work, I'm going to do the process, and I'm going to see what's behind that. And so I did a trauma-informed process, which I teach women. And I went back to the first moment where I experienced something that caused this pattern in my later life. And in this moment, similar to what you just said, I was running around the house and I was just in this love. And then I went to ask my dad for a hug, and he said, no, I'm busy now, there's no time for that. And so I felt such shame and such rejection and such abandonment that was held in my body, because we hold our memories in our body. And then on top of that, I created a belief in my unconscious, and the belief was there's not time for love, right? Our unconscious mind is basically the soundtrack, the underpinning of all of our adult life. So until I healed that, right, that kept showing up in my life. And when I did, miraculously can have a relationship and have a business, and there's no problem with it. So that's the trauma work, and it can look really different. And it, to what we imagine, it's actually not as scary as we imagine, but it's a lot to do with the trapped emotions we have in our body from previous experiences. And it has a lot to do with unconscious beliefs. And there's so many more layers to it, but that's kind of like the 2 places that I like to work, because I really like it when you have a process and it can make maximum impact, and that does.
Yeah. Well, what is the healing process for that? Because you mentioned that you had that, and then you kind of went into your past experiences and had that moment of that's what it is, but then you kind of healed from it. So what is that? Is that just a mindset healing? Inner body healing?
Yeah, I mean, this is getting into deeper stuff, but simply, Every experience we've had in our life, we hold in our body. There's a memory of that. And whilst we have that in our body, that keeps informing our present. So this is Joe Dispenza stuff, right? So when we heal, we need to clear the emotion from the body, which is what I do with people. It's very easy to clear emotions. The problem is that we don't know how to do it. It's very easy to do when you know how. So you clear the emotion that's trapped, associated with the memory, and you reprogram the unconscious mind, which is the belief, right? And so reprogramming the unconscious mind usually takes a period of a month, but it can be instantaneous. It's having the tools and the techniques. And so this is what I teach women. I teach women to be 100% responsible for their life and to use the tools and techniques. But when a blockage or something's happening in their life, to find the root cause and then shift it and change it, right? And it's not as hard as it seems. That's the secret, right? It's not when you know how, it's not as hard as it seems. And if you're watching this and I sound like I've gone off one super woo-woo, some good books to read are The Emotional Code and anything by Joe Dispenza, because he breaks down the science behind it. And it's incredible because the science is now catching up to ancient teachings.
I love reading. So I'm going to put those two books the books that you've just mentioned there in the show notes so people can refer back to it if they want to learn more. So yeah, I'll put that in. Thank you. And that's actually, I found that as a really useful explanation as well, by the way. I completely got that. So it worked for me anyway. So, so if we touch back on, then you started a business. So how long have you been running this business for?
Not long, 2.5 years.
2.5 years. And you said you've taken your 10 years worth of experience and everything that you've been through to now help other women, right?
Yeah. And so a big pain point really for me was I felt like I was searching, and it was like I had this jigsaw puzzle and I had one piece nutrition, I got another piece yoga, I got another piece meditation, and I was very frustrated because I was like, I still don't feel good. And people don't want to admit that, but I didn't. And so I kept collecting puzzle pieces, and then I did something called the medicine wheel training, which is shamanic training, right? So it's ancient shamanic wisdom, energetic medicine. And then I started doing the trauma work and the embodiment work and the sexuality work and the feminine kind of energy integration of feminine masculine work. And then I started getting this complete picture, and I went, oh, right, you need to see it all together, right? And so that's why I teach a complete multidisciplinary course where we go from the physical body, right, hormones, nervous system, nutrition, and all of these things, and we journey to our emotional world, our emotional reality. Then we go to relationship, sexuality, and finally we go to the energetic body. Because how do you heal trauma as well? You can have shifts just from doing the energy work, again, if you know how. Right? And so I don't believe healing is one-dimensional. I don't believe healing is just one tool. It's really about getting the complete picture. And my main passion or reason to be here is to educate women, because that was the information that I was missing when I was younger, and it would have been a lot easier, a lot less pain, even though you do have to go through it, if I'd had it presented together. Right.
Sounds like you found your purpose, and this is what you were here to do, and all of the events have led to this moment, right?
Absolutely. I don't doubt it. Those are the things that I doubt. Those are the things that I struggle with. But the purpose one has, for me, it's always been clear. And I always knew when I was a little girl, I always knew that I was going to do something like this inexplicably. And so in my family, they kind of mentioned, they were like, Hannah, I was just like a little bit odd, like I was a little bit mystical. I had this bizarre dance. My family was like, what is she? Felt like it was always going to happen.
Oh, I love that. And how have you maintained such a positive mindset and positive look to life? I feel like you've got this energy or aura about you. I just wanted to know, like, how have you maintained that? How do you keep that going?
I don't feel that I am positive, and I'm going to give you an explanation here.
Okay.
Because positive sometimes is fake and it's not real. So, for example, when you feel really sad and you try to be positive, you're actually lying to yourself, right? That's not alignment with your authentic self.
Interesting. So, okay. Because people always say, oh, if you're feeling down, just kind of think positively. I don't know if you've ever heard that when people.
Absolutely. And so people are missing a very clear path here. And so you have to go on a journey to the good feeling, to the higher emotional state. So it's not wrong that it's better to be in a high emotional state, but we don't want to negate our sadness, we don't want to negate our pain, we don't want to negate our misery. So I teach processes to teach people to clear emotions from their body so they can get into the higher state. But no one's going when they feel sad, I feel happy, because they don't. It's not true. It's not true. And if we don't feel the emotion, then it gets trapped in the body, and then it can create, you know, all of these things within the body. So we need to be able to take that emotion on a journey, right? When we take that emotion on a journey, we clear it, and then the end result of that process is that more positive emotion. So how do I feel good now? Because when I'm sad, I cry. Because when I'm in pain, I feel the pain fully and I do the processes. When the big scary things happen, I sit in the uncomfortability. Why is my relationship strong? Because when things get difficult, we don't try to pretend it's okay. We sit there in the uncomfortable and the painful, even if we're crying, until it gets cleared. And that's what taking responsibility looks like. It's not constantly chasing the positivity. And here's something I don't tell you: the more that you can hold the pain, the more that you can welcome the sadness, the more joy, happiness, pleasure, magnetism, zest you have for life, right? And so that's why I teach a lot of emotions, because we've got very confused. And I always like to bring in the science, even though it sounds like I'm very woo-woo today, but there's incredible doctors around now and practitioners that are doing extraordinary things. We're at a very exciting time, even if it doesn't seem it. And they did a lot of tests. I obviously always research terminal illnesses for an obvious reason, right? And so they were doing studies to see more, you know, the greatest likelihood of survival or greatest lifespan after a terminal diagnosis. And they found the people that pretended that they were okay after getting a terminal diagnosis, or the people who took it better, were the people more likely to be more ill and die sooner and have a worse period, because the positivity wasn't real, because they were keeping the emotions in the body. And the people who were honest and real and cried and showed their vulnerable self to their family were the people who did better, because those emotions didn't get trapped in the body. It doesn't mean they get stuck in the negativity, right? It just means if you feel it, you can clear it. This can be difficult if it's a new concept.
Yeah, but I'm just thinking, because so many people aren't in that mindset to be like, right, I'm feeling this way. So, you know, the expression of put on a brave face. And
yes.
I see it everywhere. And to be fair, I think I've been there myself when something happens and I'm trying not to cry and I'm just like, put on a brave face, put on a brave face. I'm trying to think, why is it that we do that? Is it just through this whole conditioning piece of remain strong, stay strong-minded? And also more, I'm just thinking also for men, you know, we have the kind of masculine and feminine energies, but for men, they kind of tend to shy away from the emotional side, or they can shy away from the emotional side of things and prevent themselves from crying. And they really do hold it in. So I'm just trying to think of why do you think that is?
Conditioning, all of it's conditioning. I remember when my mum got diagnosed and I cried. My dad's he's English, my mum was Spanish, man in his 70s, and he just looked at me and he said, Hanny, we don't behave that way, you're English, stick up a lip. You know?
Oh, wow.
And so he didn't, I was like, you just told me my mum's gonna die, you know? But for him, it was, you know, that's the way that we deal. We're English, we're stoic, you know, we keep it all in. And so culturally, and this is the whole we change to receive love. Culturally, the more that we can keep it in and the more we can hold it together, right? The better we look, the more love we receive, the more we accept it in society. And we all deeply desire to be accepted in our society. So we want to behave in ways that are acceptable. And if we behave in ways that are maybe frowned upon, like crying in public, or, you know, that can be frowned upon as attention seeking in our society. So we don't do it, right? And so that's where the education piece comes on. And that's why, you know, integrative healing, we teach so much about emotions, because we've all got these layers and layers and layers and layers of conditioning telling us that it's not okay. And so that's one piece. And the second piece is that we all live so much in our heads and we experience emotion in the body because we've become over intellectualized, right? So it's kind of We're all very rational. We all work in head-based. We're not very much kind of in our bodies. Yeah, exactly. And so when we're so much in our heads, it's very easy to bypass the emotion and not even notice it because we're numb, because we're not in our bodies, we become disembodied. So it's dual, right? So when we do the emotional work, it's the reclamation of the emotional self. It's the owning our emotions. And this is a path. This is not just, I'm going to feel my emotions. And then it's also the connection to the body, right? And those are the two pieces that kind of help you with the emotional stuff. And I love to talk about this because it's like what you said, it's a very difficult area to work with because we've received so much misinformation about it. And men, can you imagine your whole life you're told you have to be like strong and like don't cry.
Exactly.
And my partner, he works with men actually, and I love it because he's ex-military. He's in the military for 13 years, so you can imagine, big guy, you know, a lot bigger than me, very muscly, looks typically like just very big guy, and he cries all the time, and he does all of this work, and it makes me feel so just honoured to be with him and to witness that because I know the work that he's doing with the men is so powerful because they may have never even seen a man cry, right? And he's giving, by him doing it, he gives the permission slip for the other men to be real. Right?
Yes. I think crying is such a powerful emotion. Just letting it out. It's a form of release in a way. And I feel that from the people that especially the guys that I know, they don't do it. Like they just don't cry. Like my dad, for example, I don't think I've ever seen him cry. No matter what has happened. Never. And I'm just trying to think like it surely can't be healthy as well to hold all that emotion in, or maybe it's dealt with in a different way. Is that a possibility as well? It's just processed in a different way?
Yeah, so each emotion, I mean, we really clear emotions using embodiment, so body-based practices. So for example, you might have, I mean, I think crying is always great if possible. I struggle with crying because of the trauma that I experienced made me cut off, right? So coming back to crying has been a process in itself. I very easily kind of disassociate, right? So that's been a journey for me as well. But crying actually releases energy from the nervous system. And so when you understand trauma, it's very, very important. But yes, you can release emotional energies in other ways. So for example, rage and anger, you can release through, running, right? You know how some people love running and they feel because you're moving that energy, but that's more of a rage. Okay, that's more of like a fire-based emotion. Something like crying, you want to see what the emotion is behind that because crying can be due to many emotions. If it's frustration, okay, then the running is going to help. If it's deep grief, then the running is going to help somewhat, but you need to go deeper. And we also hold kind of grief and all those emotions in our arms, right, in our upper chest. So they're different tools we want to use to clear.
Interesting, because you talked about there's different trigger points for crying. You're right with that. I was just thinking, because if I don't know, a baby's born and you're so happy, then that's one reason. Or if you just had a breakup with your partner, then that's another reason. There are so many different reasons for it, actually. Yeah, I was just thinking that it's not, crying isn't a bad thing or associated with a negative emotion. It can also be that positive emotion as well.
Absolutely. And depending on the emotion behind the tears, the chemical composition of the tears is different. So there's 3 different types of tears.
I didn't know that.
That's so interesting. I love this stuff.
How did you even know that? That's so interesting.
Because I'm such a nerd.
Nothing wrong with that. I want to know more. Tell me. So there's 3 different types.
And the best thing is, it's when we're crying and pain, when we feel really deep internal pain, the tears are designed to reach our mouth, and then there is a pain relief as part of the tear. So the tear is actually designed to calm you down, right? And that is how beautiful our bodies are. That is how incredible the intelligence of our body is. We only just started to understand a little bit about how the body works, right? But there's so much magic to it. And so when I'm sad, I think about that. I'm like, I think my tears are my pain relief. I've got to give myself my natural drugs,
Yeah.
That helps.
What are the happy tears then? I'm curious to know.
I don't know. That can be a research project for anyone.
Right, I'm going to have to. I'll head over to Google after this to have a little browse. But no, I'm really intrigued. I didn't know about that. I just thought they were the same thing, same tears coming out, regardless of what the emotion behind it was. That's interesting.
It is incredible. Our bodies are incredible.
Yeah. So tell me, Hannah, what's next for you? What are you up to?
So the next thing coming up is we've got a wild woman immersion. So usually integrative healing has always been a 4 or 8 month course, but we're actually organising an intensive weekend, so you can get loads of these processes that I've talked about today. We actually guide you through, and so it's a 3-day weekend coming up on July 6th to the 11th. We have 6 teachers. We have lots of trauma processes, like I've mentioned. Resensitizing, so rewilding rituals, which are really reconnecting with the body, reconnecting with pleasure, kind of the journey from numbness to pleasure, which is an interesting thing. My partner is doing a piece on relationships and integration of the healthy feminine and masculine. And there's so much more. I could literally go on, but the whole weekend is designed, I kind of talked about it, but to reconnect you with the authentic self, so who you are before life told you who to be. Right? Yeah. And just that re-shifting. And so the wild woman is really that. It's a reclamation of all the parts of yourself. And so I know it's going to be really, really powerful and beautiful.
Wow, that sounds amazing. And where can the listeners here reach you? How can they find you?
So the best way to find me is via Instagram. And on my Instagram, you will see in the bio, there is a link for Integrative Healing, which is the course that I've mentioned, which is if you want to go deeper into this and join our community of wonderful, wonderful women, or you can have a look at the immersion. And yeah, if you have any questions or you just want to connect, I'm super happy to answer messages, and again, just drop into my messages.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Hannah, for coming on this podcast. It was amazing speaking to you. I feel like I've learned so much from just this podcast. So thank you so much.
You're so welcome. It's been such a pleasure. I'm really excited to be here. It's been wonderful. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Fearless Females Voice podcast. Be sure to complete the free Fearless test, where you can discover how to increase your confidence, build your resilience and self-love. You can find this test on my website, which is www.fearlessfemales.me. And to connect with other like-minded females, make sure you join our Facebook group, which is called Fearless Females. Oh, and one last thing. I'd like you to do a massive favor for me. If you enjoyed this episode, then be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Thank you.